Thank you. I want to also thank David North, who invited me to this. I'm not sure if he was the one with the original idea or not, but I met David's, I've never actually met David, but I knew David's son, who is a student at AAE in Apple Valley. And David reached out to me on Facebook to come speak to you guys today. I'm honored to be here. I've covered Rotary meetings as a reporter, so it's very weird to be on this side of the microphone. What I want to talk to you a little bit today is a little bit about the Daily Press, a little bit about why I chose to go back, and a little bit about kind of the plan for the future, and then obviously take any questions, or as Mike Page calls them, slings and arrows, I think. I'm fine with taking those as well. So I started at the Daily Press in July of 2015. And I was hired to cover Apple Valley, water, and criminal courts. And at the time, I had never had a job in journalism. I had been working for 3 years in the logistics industry, kind of hating my existence and promoting kind of my lot in life. And after 3 years, I quit that job. I moved back to the high desert from San Francisco because I couldn't afford to live up there anymore. And I kind of did what a lot of the community leaders in the high desert are asking the younger generation to do right now, which is to go off, get a degree, and come back to the high desert to live and work and play. And I didn't do it thinking that that's what I ever wanted to do. I did it out of necessity, essentially. When I came back in 2014, I basically made a promise to myself that I wouldn't take any job unless it involved writing, because that's all I ever really wanted to do since I was a little kid. So when I got to the paper, I didn't really know what to expect because I had no prior experience. I didn't know if I could do the job. I didn't know if I would really fit in with the group that was there, and it was a much larger group than we have now. I feel like I remember at the very least 7 full-time reporters in the newsroom. Currently we have 3 full-time reporters, 2 in news, 1 in sports. And we have a fair amount of freelancers that help us out when we're in a pinch as well. So what I found on day 1 when I got to the paper was that I fit in almost immediately. Marshall might say something different, but I felt like I fit in. I don't know if it was day 1 or not, but I remember walking into the newsroom, and I want to say it was our online coordinator at the time and our former Adelanto reporter, Shay Johnson. They were like arguing about grammar, and I felt like I was in, whatever my version of heaven is, just walking through the door. So it was a good time, and I think everybody who was in that newsroom at that time looks back on it with fond memories of what we were able to accomplish. And even then we felt we were a small staff. We're much smaller now, but I'm working on hopefully changing that as well as we move down the road. So the Daily Press for me ended up being kind of like a saving grace. I was at a very low point in my life when I got my job there. And it ended up providing me with a voice that I never knew I could have. It allowed me to meet all the amazing people that live and kind of impact our region. Maybe not all of them, but I met a lot of them. And it allowed me to have a conversation on a daily basis with readers and it allowed me to inform them, and I'm grateful for that. The other part of how the Daily Press changed, we really kind of took place in our archive room. In that room we have 82 or 3 years worth of print archives that date back to 1937. And whenever whenever our former publisher, Steve Hunt, wasn't looking, I would go back there and just kind of peruse anything that piqued my interest. And what I found more than anything was a newspaper that was telling at least part of the story of our region's history. You know, I don't think any paper ever tells the full story of what's going on at a given time, but you do the best that you can with what you have. And at that time, the paper was little more than the founder, John Barry, and a few administrative staff that he had. But they told the story of a region that was kind of on the come up. You know, you had at one point Oro Grande being bigger than Victorville, and Victorville, you know, incorporating as a city, Apple Valley and Hesperia doing it much later. And especially in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you could look at any edition of the Daily Press and pretty much find the same people. There weren't as many people here, obviously, as there are today, but you would find out basically what people were doing with their lives. It was essentially that generation's version of Facebook or Instagram or whatever. That's where you went to kind of see what was going on in your part of the world. And it had a very hometown feel to it. It had a very personal feel to it. And when I think about the things that I want to do for the paper, the things that I want to bring back to the paper, that's one of those things, is bringing back a community feel. I don't know if I want to say small town because, I mean, the region is pushing toward 500,000 people. But I do want to bring back a sense of community. And I think a newspaper, a daily newspaper in any community can offer some semblance of that feeling for people, that there's a community working together to better where they live. So with that said, I left the newspaper in, when was it? July of 2019. And I left because there had been a lot of changes that had gone on, including the hiring of a new city editor that was frankly at odds with kind of the rest of the staff. The rest of the staff, for as long as I've been there, was, you know, kind of like in the business of presenting news to the community. And the new city editor at the time was hired as kind of like, he came on as a favor to Steve Hunt in a pinch when we lost the editor before him. And, you know, he was from outside the area. He's an Orange County guy, he's not a high desert guy. And he had a very different vision for just what the news was going to be and how it was going to be reported. And I can't think of anybody in the newsroom at that time that was kind of on board with him. So there was a lot of pushback on both sides. There was a lot of anger and frustration. Shay Johnson left in that time period, as did Paola Baker, who was a public safety reporter. I left. The chief photographer, Jim Quigg, left. And right around that time is when Steve Hunt died. And I think Marshall was actually the first person to tell me. And it was all the former reporters, ironically, who knew that Steve had died before any of the current reporters. So I remember when that happened, the city editor called me because he had planned about like a year in advance a trip to Ireland with his wife. And so he was going to be gone for 3 weeks. Steve was no longer around, and there was really no one to kind of fill in to just ensure that the paper got out every day and that people were doing their jobs. So while I was working at the Lewis Center, I came back part-time. Theoretically it was part-time, but I was working basically 2 8-hour shifts, one over in Apple Valley and one at the Daily Press. And I would work nights, and I would make sure that the paper got out, and I would kind of talk to the reporters and help them through their stories, help them with editing, things like that. And those few months that I did that killed me because you really saw what the morale was like in the newsroom, and it was very low. So I basically came back to help out, some of my friends that were still there trying to do what I think is really important work. Around that time, the editor of the Stockton Record, his name's Don Blunt, came down to help out. He's also, in addition to being the editor of the Stockton Record, he's the editor for all of the California newspapers that are owned by now Gannett, and the Daily Press is one of them. So we have a network of 12 California newspapers that kind of work together as part of what I guess essentially is called the USA Today Network. And so the Daily Press is a part of that now, and he came down to essentially run the newsroom for the 3 weeks that the previous city editor was out. And it was during those 3 weeks that we got to talking. He asked a lot of questions, because when he came down, he saw a newsroom that was essentially in shambles, and not running effectively, and basically not doing the work that it was supposed to be doing. So he asked a lot of questions of myself, of former reporters, of current reporters, of pretty much anybody who would answer him. And around that same time, he and the now general manager of the Daily Press, Steve Nakuten, sat down with me and offered me the city editor job. And I think I remember getting mad at them, mainly because I had just left. I don't like appearing disloyal to anyone, and I felt like if I was going to take a job like that, I would look extremely disloyal to the Lewis Center and to Lisa Lamb, who I had grown to love as a boss, and especially just seeing how hard she works every day for the kids at AAE and down at North in San Bernardino. So I was very frustrated. Initially, I didn't even give it any credence, and then slowly but surely, whatever bug got into me in 2015 started to creep back, and really the end result was I decided to come back to the paper because I felt like the Lewis Center would be fine without me, but the Daily Press wouldn't. And that sounds somewhat arrogant, I think, but I do really believe that. So I came back in December of 2016, and it's been a few months now, and it is without a doubt the hardest job I've ever had. From the people who call us, or call my number directly every day, to the emails that I get, to just the job itself, it quite literally is an 18 to 19 an hour job. Mark, can you put that back up? And I think one of the reasons why it's harder is that the city editor job now is basically a job that was, the responsibilities of the city editor now were divvied up between at least 2 people, if not 3, when I first started. I'm in charge of publishing everything online to social media, in charge of editing everything that comes through these reporters. I'm in charge of scheduling freelancers when we need them to cover sports games and things like that. Anything that might have been kind of divvied up a little bit more evenly back in the day all falls on one desk now. So it is tough, and I was talking to my dad a couple weeks ago, and I don't know what I was complaining about. I was complaining about something, and then he goes, "Well, do you regret going back then?" And because when I told my mom that I was going back, she cried, and they were not tears of joy. She almost hung up on me when I broke the news to her. My dad, they both ended up being really supportive in the end. But my parents, I think, see the Daily Press in the same way that I think a large section of the community sees the Daily Press, and they look at it with frustration. Whether it's something to do with the business itself, or the insanely hard work that the reporters do and the entire staff does to make sure that that a paper even gets out every day. And then how they're compensated. It's tough. It's a tough business to be in. But anyway, my dad asked me if I regretted leaving the Lewis Center and coming back, and I said absolutely not, because I still have a ridiculously deep love for this newspaper. I grew up reading it, and the people who were the faces that I saw in the paper every week, before I even got to the paper, when I was a kid, when I saw their faces, they were like larger than life to me for some reason. Like they were the voices of the print newspaper. Steve Williams, Stuart Kellogg, David Allen. You know, these people were kind of like celebrities to me, and I don't know why. But I appreciated the work that they did, and I don't regret coming back one bit. I enjoy it every single day. There are days that are harder than others. But I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and just talk about one thing that I don't think we talk about very much when we talk about newspapers. I spoke to the Levita group, the Lucerne Valley Economic Development Association group, last month. And the question was asked of me, you know, how much longer can we expect to have the daily press around? And I think embedded in that question is, you know, that idea of the journalism industry dying. And one of the things that I try to really instill in people is that I don't think journalism, the industry on a whole, is dying. I think it's rapidly changing, and it's about 10 to 15 years behind the point of when it should have started changing. So we're definitely in a very different industry even than we were 10 years ago. So one of the things that I look at every day, and you're actually the first group that gets to see these numbers. I didn't show these to Levita. But these numbers up here are essentially our online numbers every day. Where they're tracked, so every time an article gets clicked on, every time the main page gets clicked on, a section within the newspaper gets clicked on, it gets tracked through this analytic tool called Parsley. And so over on this side, you have the top posts for the last 10 minutes, so it basically shows you what's trending on your website. And on the other side, you have the top posts for the day. Up here are some other numbers. This one is always fun to look at because it shows you the average time someone spends on one article. If you're anything above 1 minute, you're doing really well. And it's frustrating for people like Martin and for myself, for as long as I did it, because you can work for 7-8 hours on one story, making sure that everything's right, making sure that you have both sides of that story in there, enough voices to make sure that the story is as accurate as possible. And those 7 hours, if you're lucky, result in someone clicking on a story on your website and reading it for about a minute. But that's kind of the nature of the business, and that's why when you look at, I mean, just Journalism 101, you put all of the most important information up first, because you know you've got maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs before someone loses interest. And that's not everybody, but that is essentially the average. So if you scroll down, Martin, a little bit, for our top post for the day, we're looking at, this is our travel columnist, John Byer. His column on climbing Bell Mountain recently is our top post for the day. Right now it has about 2,551 views. The top trending story right now is one I wrote earlier this morning and got up online, is that a soldier was killed at Fort Irwin on Monday during a training exercise. I'm actually still waiting on a little bit more information from Fort Irwin to update that story. So that one's doing about, when I first posted it and got it onto Facebook, it was doing about 82 views per minute. Right now it's at about 46 views. So this is generally, if you scroll back up, this is essentially how your website is doing, your news website is doing on any given day. So this is what it looks like today. We have about 13,000 post views and about 8,000 visitors up to this point who have read for about 8.1 thousand minutes. So if you go to the historical one, Martin. But just to give you, I want to give a broader sense of why these numbers are important. They show us what people are reading. I don't think that those numbers should actually dictate what we write, though. Typically, public safety stories get read a lot, but the more you market a specific writer or a specific story, the better way you market it, especially online, I think the more consistent the views become with that particular writer. John Byer has been writing travel columns for us for a number of years now, and only recently have I seen his numbers online start to tick up. He had a column on, I can't remember exactly what it was on yet, but he had a column a couple weeks back that had 12,000 views. 12,000 views for any article is a decent amount for our paper online. So, if you go to historical, Martin, right there, and then go, click that, and then do this month on the right here. Okay, so for the month of March, we are at about 408,000 page views. Page views include everything, including just clicks or clicks onto the homepage of the Daily Press, or any section of the Daily Press. If you scroll down a little bit, I don't know why this says page views, but if you scroll down right here and it says, I don't think this thing's working, page views on the left right there, that number is the amount of views on the articles that are on our website. So the columns that are written, the opinion pieces, the news articles, that number will be usually a little bit lower than the page view number, but we're actually seeing those numbers not converge entirely, but this year we're seeing this number, especially the post views, the views on actual articles where people are reading stories, is up. Through January and February of this year, that number was up 20% compared to January and February of 2019. And a lot of that literally is just taking the time to post stories onto Facebook, get them out on social media, spread them through all the various avenues we have to get them out into the community. So we're actually, to give you some context on these numbers, 408,408 page views for March of 2020. In March of 2019, we had, in total for the entire month, I believe, a little over 900,000 page views for that month. So, and we also had 591,000 post views. So, within the first 10 days of the new month, we're already at 316,000. Definitely more than halfway there to beating the numbers from last year for the month of March. So if you go over back to historical, Martin, and then you go to January, So these are our numbers for the entire year since January. 2,522,733 page views over 70 days. That number is actually down from last year by about 2%. And the reason that it's down, I took more time than I should have to figure this out. But the reason that that's down is that if you scroll down to the articles, Martin, you'll see right here on these articles, underneath them, it says Facebook, it says Google, maybe farther down one might say Daily Press. That is the indicator of essentially how people are finding your stories. So for that one, number 10, 8 arrested at suspected drug house in Hesperia, 42% of people read that based on a Google search. And that quite literally was not anything we were seeing last year. We struggled for a long time to get more people to basically find us through Google searches. And now we're seeing that number trend up. So the page views are actually down, I believe, because fewer people are needing to go to the actual homepage of the Daily Press website to find stories, because they're available to find them either through Facebook, through Google searches, Twitter, whatever it might be. So our top story for the year was written in February. It was actually written by Luann Hunt, Steve Hunt's wife. And she wrote, after Kobe Bryant died, she wrote an open letter to Vanessa Bryant, basically talking about grief, talking about what life is like when you lose the person who's most important to you. And that, I did not expect this. Luann reached out to me and said, hey, I have this Valley Voices, would you consider running it? And I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll put it online. I didn't expect anything to come of it. It's by far our most read story of the year. It has 81,000 page views. And to give you some context on that, these numbers are pretty much on par with your average size newspaper. The Stockton Record up in Stockton has almost identical numbers to us. They have about 2.5 million page views, about 2 million post views, and they're in a metropolitan area of 700,000 people. So we compete fairly well with the other newspapers in our network. The ones we don't compete well with are the ones like the Desert Sun down in Palm Springs, which does, the Desert Sun will do numbers in a day what we'll do in 4 days. And they're just that size of a paper. I think that community is, I don't know, I don't want to say that the community is more interested in news of the area, but I think there's definitely statistics out there that show a correlation between education and people who seek out news, I think. And I think it was from the High Desert Survey recently, we saw that 52% of residents in the High Desert region don't have a high school diploma, is what I read. Was that right? 52%. So that was a staggering number to me. I was very surprised by that. So last year, the Daily Press did 12 million page views for the entirety of 2019. About 7 million post views on articles. My goal is to, I've kind of scrapped my goal for the page view increase because it doesn't look like it looks like it might not happen because we're doing better at Google searches. But my goal for post views is to increase them by at least another million. I'd like to see that at about 8 million this year, and I think we can get there. Like I said, we're about 20% above average so far this year. So those are numbers that I obsess over constantly, and I think that they're an example of one of the ways in which we can increase our place in the community, increase just people thinking about the Daily Press, coming to the Daily Press, going to the Daily Press for news. Our biggest competitor in the High Desert is Victorville News Group. They are, yeah, go ahead.
So, that was my question.
Yeah.
Is their news accurate?
In a sense. If you see news on VV&G that says, you know, I don't know, the Air Quality Management District is having its annual, the contest for the county, right? That news tends to be accurate on VV&G because what they do is they take a press release and they copy and paste it. The other news, I think it depends. I don't think it's necessarily a question of whether or not VV&G's news is accurate. I think it's a question of how adept their reporting is, and I don't think their reporting is as adept as ours. I don't think they fully understand what it means to be a reporter. And you can see that in the headlines that they choose to run, where I've literally seen headlines like, man arrested for killing his wife, but it'll be like his name, like John Smith arrested for killing his wife. You would never write that, because at this point, we don't know if he killed her or not, of that crime. And those are things that we have to be absolutely just extremely careful with. Attribution is everything in our industry. And if you aren't attributing every fact to something, and it's different depending on the type of article. A feature article, you can be a little bit more lenient with attribution because generally speaking, you're going to be interviewing someone about, whatever it is that they're doing. And you don't need to attribute every single fact, because the reader knows that this is a conversation between two people. But if we're getting information from the Sheriff's Department or a grand jury report or something coming out about Valley, Victorville, wherever it happens to be, or we're reporting on a city council meeting or a Rotary meeting, we will be attributing everything to the people who said them. And in my personal opinion, the things that I've seen on VV&G, they don't necessarily do that. What I think is fascinating about VV&G, though, is what they've been able to do in this era of journalism. Social media has made everyone a journalist. What is fascinating about that is that is kind of like the driver that brings a community together in this day and age. The scary part is that you don't have really anyone at all who is holding to the journalistic standards that come from a place like the Daily Press, because we've been doing literal journalism and holding ourselves accountable in the same way that we try to hold other organizations accountable since 1937. So that, I would say, is the difference. I don't know if I would go so far as to say that their information is inaccurate. I just think the way that it's reported is sometimes irresponsible. And that can happen when you rely solely on a Facebook group of commenters who are just regular people out in the community. Those voices are important, but they're not as important in that regard as the official voices. Huh? 3 minutes. All right, I'm done then. So let's talk questions. Mike.
Yeah, that other topic just brings up this whole thing of fake news, and I'm not necessarily talking local, but when I look on the internet and look for things, I don't know what is true or not, because it appears that people say things and then it just runs its course and people start believing it.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just comment on that, even on the national news? Because I'm not sure what's true and what's not true.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, everyone has to do their due diligence when it comes to figuring out whether something is fake or not. And a lot of the times I've noticed that whether something is fake or not can come down to a person's political beliefs. And if you're a left-leaning person, Fox News is probably going to come across as very fake to you. It's the same goes for the New York Times if you're on the right side of everything. But there is legitimately fake news out there. I saw a post on Facebook the other day, and I've seen this 3 times now, and each time it was different. It was a tweet from Donald Trump, and the tweet was, any sitting president who allows the Dow to drop more than 1,000 points in one day should be impeached immediately. And they take the tweet and they put it on Facebook, and then they spread that around, and that tweet is absolutely 100% fake. He never said that on Twitter or anywhere else. But, that's an example of something that can be spread that is, dangerous. I'll give you just one example really quickly of something that happened to us very recently. The night that General Soleimani was killed, Paul Cook put out a press release on that, and I had one of our reporters basically just write that up. And he added some local voices, just some people in the community who maybe had an opinion on it. And far and away, 100% were like, yes, this guy should have been killed. Wonderful. And I told him, I said, this is a little bit too slanted to one side. We need to bring this back to the center a little bit. And I asked him to call a person in the community that might have maybe a differing view. And so we called this person, only to find out much later that the person we actually called was not who we thought we called. And that was my fault, because I gave our reporter the incorrect number. I gave him the number I thought I had for someone, and it turned out to be the number for someone else. And when the next day comes around and the person who we thought we quoted is emailing us saying, when did you talk to me? You know, it's an example of fake news because quite literally he wasn't quoted, even though we thought we did. But it's an example of how dangerous this job can be if you don't check off all your boxes. And I take full responsibility for something like that happening because I'm the one who handed out the number. Here's his number, give him a call. You know?
Kind of brings up, so if we want to fact check something, do you have any recommendations for us?
Yeah, I mean, Google's wonderful. You know, I use Google constantly when I'm fact checking a lot of stuff. And when I say Google, I just mean I'll type, like if I'm going to be doing a story later today on the Mojave Water Agency and some changes going on in that organization. So whenever I'm looking at what the Mojave Water Agency does, or if I'm trying to remember, rather than go back and try to check previous articles or notes that I have, I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to go to their website. And I'm going to attribute what I find there to their website so that people know what I'm attributing. The next best thing that I think you can do, it takes a little bit more time, and it's fascinating to me that this doesn't happen, call people. You know, I've had so many instances where as a reporter, this happened a lot, where I would see something and I would call that person, be like, I'm seeing this, is this true, is this really happening? And they didn't even know about it, you know? So I personally don't believe that the fake news is as big of a problem as maybe some other folks do. I think that it is a major issue, and I think that there is absolutely some people out there who are knowingly putting out fake news. But I do personally believe that a lot of what people think is fake news is actually the result of political biases on either side, you know, and that, you know, that's also just my opinion. So.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. And we normally have a book up here that you can sign, that we donate that to the Victorville Library. Okay. Someone can check it out.